as we can feel in this room, tonight is really a celebration. On behalf of Telfair Museums, Suzanne, Alonzo, and myself, we welcome you to the opening of 5 decades, the first full career and most comprehensive presentation of the artist Suzanne Jackson's life and work. In 1968, Suzanne promised to herself that she would never take jobs outside of the arts again. And this self-imposed mandate has organized the past 50 years of her life, prioritizing her desire to paint in full pursuit of an artistic life, and she has maintained this ethos as a guiding principle to today. Without the time to go into individual thank yous, I want to acknowledge everyone in the first few rows this evening, as they're a core group of people that have contributed their resources, time, energy, intellectual property, and generosity towards making this retrospective and forthcoming catalog happen. So thank you all for being here. By working to expand the systems of thought, of power, representation, and authorship that are historically exclusionary, and specifically disrupting an art historical canon that previously had no place in its record for artists like Suzanne Jackson, especially as a Black and woman artist. This project has not only been a labor of love, full of joy and excitement, but also a very conscious effort to create a new body of scholarship and bring overdue visibility to this important American artist. This exhibition says that stories like Suzanne's are worth being gathered, worth being recorded, worth being shared, and worth being celebrated. Art history is a field that thrives on definition, and it is my hope that an examination and a re-examination of her work will help to make messy these valorized narratives and timelines, those that, until recently, promoted the invisibilities of artists like Suzanne Jackson. It is my wish that her work has opened up to many more generations of artists, thinkers, and doers who find inspiration in seeking their own interpretations and nuanced understandings of life, and who find value in the singular contributions that one person can make to collective culture. So tonight we celebrate you, Suzanne. I delight in the ways we came to know and understand one another over these few years. You are a tireless collaborator, a fearless visionary, and I'm honored to be able to share your story. And also we celebrate you all, our extended Savannah community, for providing a home to Suzanne Jackson over the past 20+ years. Savannah and the Southeast have been the backdrop for her to create some of the most daring work of her lifetime, work that we are thrilled to debut this evening. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce Alonzo Davis and Suzanne Jackson, who will be in conversation with me this evening. Alonzo and Suzanne first met in 1967, 52 years ago. And when we were planning this program, Suzanne affirmatively said, "I want to be joined by Alonzo on stage." So Alonzo, thank you for being here this evening. Alonzo Davis's career as an artist spans 4 decades. A native of Tuskegee, Alabama, Davis moved with his family to Los Angeles in his early teens. After acquiring an undergraduate degree at Pepperdine College, he earned an MFA in printmaking and design at Otis Art Institute in Los Angeles. Influenced early on by the assemblagists, Davis soon took wing and began to experiment with a variety of mediums, techniques, and themes. At the suggestion of artist and former professor Charles White, Davis began to produce prints and paintings in series. While he was inspired by travel to Africa, the Caribbean, the American Southwest, the colors and patterns of the Pacific Rim cultures also seeped into his work. During the 1970s and early 80s, Davis's involvement in the California mural movement culminated with the 1984 Olympic Murals Project. His eye on 84 is one of 10 murals on the walls of downtown Los Angeles, Harbor Freeway. In 1987, he entered new territory, literally and figuratively, when he moved from Los Angeles to Sacramento. From there, fellowships in Hawaii and Texas inaugurated new bodies of work and led to job opportunities in academia, deanships at the San Antonio Art Institute and the Memphis College of Art. During this period, his ongoing blanket series of woven paintings morphed into installations, some incorporating light elements, rocks and arrows, and the tar paper series, richly textured organic forms that Davis choreographed onto large spaces. These works signaled a transition from 2D to 3D. Commissions to create public art for the Boston subway, Atlanta International Airport, Wolf Chase Galleria, and the Memphis Shelby County Library in Tennessee indirectly led the way to the next large body of work with bamboo as his primary medium. Bamboo insinuated its way into Davis's work about 15 years ago, and he has since launched a number of series, sculptural forms that he regards as paintings in the round. Since moving to Maryland over 10 years ago, Davis has been the recipient of numerous public commissions and awards, including a permanent installation for the U.S. Embassy in Togo, West Africa. Throughout her distinguished career, Suzanne Jackson has exhibited her work in museums and galleries around the world. Her artworks and archival materials can be found in public and private collections, including the collections of the California African American Museum in Los Angeles and the Indianapolis Museum of Art at Newfields, as well as the Getty Research Institute and the Smithsonian Institute's Archives of American Art. Recent exhibitions include Holding On to a Sound at O-Town House in Los Angeles, Life Model, Charles Whiting's Students at LACMA, Soul of a Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power at the Brooklyn Museum, West by Midwest at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, and Now Dig This, Art in Black Los Angeles, 1960 to 1980, organized by the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. Jackson's costume and scenic designs have been featured in productions at the Berkeley Repertory Theater, California Shakespeare Festival, El Teatro Campesino, John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, Mark Taylor Forum, Oakland Ensemble, Philadelphia Drama Guild, and the Yale Cabaret Repertory and University Theaters. In addition to exhibition catalogs for the aforementioned exhibitions, Jackson has been featured in publications including Black Arts West, Culture and Struggle in Post-War LA, and LA Rising, SoCal Artists Before 1980. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Painting from San Francisco State College and a Master of Fine Arts in Design from the Yale School of Drama. Our forthcoming catalog for 5 decades will be released this fall. So please join me in welcoming Suzanne Jackson and Alonzo Davis. Well, that was a lot. You have had very rich careers. As a starting point this evening, and as you've heard from their biographies, you've both lived in many places and worked in many places. And you bring a very global perspective, both of you, to your art making. So I thought maybe we could start with the idea of your upbringings as a launching point for this perspective that you've carried throughout your life. Something they both mentioned to me in, well, Suzanne, it's a quote she's told me before, and Alonzo said the same thing to us last night at dinner. He said, nobody ever told us we couldn't do something. And in a sense, that early confidence and sense of approval to try and do things, to learn new things, is a very generous way to develop a self-identity. So I thought maybe we could start on the topic of your upbringings. Alonzo in Tuskegee, Alabama, Suzanne in San Francisco and Fairbanks, as a way to sort of think about how these early upbringings informed your values and perspectives that you've carried throughout your lives.
I want to start with an acknowledgement of past. And I'm going to read to you names of artists who passed on in honor of their spirit and their influence that have got us here to where we are. So just as a shade, a libation in words, I'd like to read Joan Amper, Romare Beard, Huey Becker, John Vickers, Gloria Bohannon, Bernie Casey, Elizabeth Catton, Ron Griffin, Camille Higgins, Barnett Honeywood, Anna Meshish, Ron Moore, Bill Pasha, Noah Purefoy, John Riddle, Arnold Schifrin, John Scott, Joe Sims, Ruth White, and Charles White. Alabama, Tuskegee, Red Dirt, Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver. Those are my roots. I come from that kind of down south. I'm still Southerner, even though I've lived a lot of places. People say, what are you? I'm culturally Southern. It's real interesting. Never let it. It's never left. Started art in elementary school. Tried to do a whole lot of other things. Didn't work. And life has proceeded from there. Family split up. We migrated to California on the train from Birmingham to Chicago to LA. Edmonton, D. And then high school and college and taking a risk. My mother said, you can't do it. I said, we come from Tuskegee. We got to do it. Everybody else, that's all I know. So I formed the gallery in 1967. Suzanne and I crossed paths. And that's the beginning of this conversation.
Well, I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but I lived there just the first 9 months of my life because my parents got into one of those big round cars and drove across the United States. I remember stopping in Delta Pass and then arriving in San Francisco. And my first birthday was what's called Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year. And I always thought I was Chinese because I loved the lanterns and the dragons and all those things, and we always ate Chinatown. And I guess there was a reason. I realized that in my life, my parents moved in order to give me better educational advantages. But when we moved to San Francisco, my parents moved there during the war, and World War II. I have to remember to say which one. World War II. And when the war was over, my father drove the cable cars and the trolley cars, and I was able to ride on the trolley with him, and it would pass through Fisherman's Wharf, and I'd see the Sergeant Johnson murals that were in the walls. And at Coit Tower, when you go up Coit Tower, there were murals there. I wasn't really aware of these things until I became older and realized that those were monuments from the WPA in those buildings. And that was when I returned to San Francisco. When the war was over and my father was driving the trolleys, he came home to my mother and said, I think I'm going to Guam to work. And she said, I'd rather go to Alaska than go to Guam. Well, 3 weeks later, he came home and said, guess what? I'm moving to Alaska to work with Peter Kiewit and Sons, and I'm going to be driving the forklift. My father was a teamster because he'd been a milkman in St. Louis, and then because he drove the trolleys, he was able then to be qualified as a forklift driver, which probably was unusual at that time for any person of color to be able to drive a forklift. So he helped to finish building the Alcan Highway that was actually started during the war. A lot of the African-American soldiers actually were part of building the original Alcan Highway through Alaska, Canada. After a point, I missed my father. I missed my daddy because he used to take me all around San Francisco, looking at art, looking at animals, and I just missed that. My mother stayed at home quietly, doing housework and sewing and things like that, and I missed my father. So we went up for a visit, and eventually I went to school there, Monroe High School, which was a really very good elementary school and high school. Very good school. small student body, and by the time I actually taught myself to paint there. I taught reading the how-to paint books that I bought at the pharmacy, and there's a painting of mine in the exhibition that's from that period. And then I won a scholarship to come back to San Francisco to go to college, and there I studied painting, creative writing, and dance. And graduated, auditioned for Music Circus, and that was in order to take a State Department tour of Mexico and South America. And it was 11 countries in South America. When I came back to the States, my friends convinced me to come to Los Angeles, and it smelled just like South America. And I decided I wanted to not have to go back home again. And the fifth person I met was Alonzo Davis, because he was looking at artwork from an artist who was moving to Spain with his family, and he built this little house on the side of the hill in Echo Park, and there was Alonzo there. And I didn't make the connection. Alonzo was starting a gallery or having one. And then everyone was telling me I should take class with Charles White. And I took class with Charles White. I was looking for studio space, and it just happened to be around the corner in a building that reminded me of a place that I stayed, Alhambra Hotel in Montevideo, and that was the Granada building. And from then on, that was supposed to be my studio, and there were artists like David Hammonds and Timothy Washington who convinced me that they should have an exhibition in my studio space. So that's how I started the gallery.
And Gallery 32, and Brockman Gallery were both 24 years old when you began your galleries. And something else that Alonzo also mentioned last night that really resonated with you both, he said, we were working out of a label we weren't trying to create for ourselves, sort of talking about this hybrid identity or possible negative connotation with having a gallery, running a gallery, and also having an active studio practice. And I noticed it's both not in your biographies, right? It mentions of your galleries, but these are very important historical moments, and the records for those are very important to talk about. So I thought maybe for a minute we could talk about sort of the origin stories of your spaces, how they were set within the context of the larger LA arts community at the time. Suzanne, you had mentioned the saying used to be that Alonzo's gallery showed all the people with master's degree, and my gallery would be anything and anybody that fell off the street. Is that true?
Well, first of all, Alonzo's mother and aunt moved to Los Angeles, didn't they? And Alonzo, I remember going to a board meeting. Alonzo's, you had, your parents were college professors, weren't they? And very organized. Yeah. My parents were kind of entrepreneurs and had their own businesses, and so I couldn't imagine not earning something on my, doing it myself. But I wasn't planning to have a gallery. I was just looking for studio space. And Alonzo's family actually worked as a unit, as I saw it, where they basically really were very organized as having a board of directors and having everything structured as a gallery should be, because
let me interrupt and say, my mother was a librarian and my aunt was a librarian.
Exactly.
My started out was very different.
Yeah.
You started the gallery to be a for-profit commercial space. And sort of the beginnings of Gallery 32 were very different.
I was persistent that I should have studio. That was what I learned in college. My first art classes were in college. And the emphasis in San Francisco was that most artists would find a loft space or a storefront and have a place to work. So when I moved to Los Angeles, that's all I was interested in, was looking for a really good studio. And in the Granada buildings, I could live upstairs and work downstairs, even though we weren't supposed to. But that's the way it worked in Los Angeles in the early days. You always lived where you weren't supposed to, and you had a studio.
I think that still goes on.
Yeah. Probably here as well. So I was talking to having some friends have a first exhibition. One friend from college in San Francisco, and then I met Timothy Washington, and another jewelry artist from Santa Barbara. So that was the first exhibition, and the second one, we didn't quite know. I didn't know what I was going to do if I had to do it. So the photo that's become iconic for Gallery 32, with me sitting in the lobby, the lower part of the Granada buildings with two friends. Those two friends were from a water-based media, or from a watercolor class, Annie Bianucci and George Evans. And the photo was taken by Greg Edwards, who was the younger brother of Mel Edwards, who became really, an iconic artist, sculptor from Los Angeles, who lives in New York now. And somehow it just grew from there. And artists would come in, and they came to the first reception, they'd tell other artists, and then more artists would come, and they'd show me their work. And people like David Hammonds would come in and put some work on the wall. I think I was just telling Alonzo that we probably are the reason that David Hammonds is such a rebel, because we allowed him to misbehave. I think Alonzo was better about being structured, and I just let David come in and put art up whenever he wanted.
They brought paintings in and were wet.
Yeah, the studio with a fresh. And for us in Gallery 32, that was exciting. We were just to see new work by friends was very exciting, and then we'd have conversations. So we had poetry, but actually the two galleries worked well together, because there would be an opening on one night and then an opening on the other. People started going from one space to the other to see what was going to happen at each space. So.
Well, maybe Alonzo, can you talk a little bit about Limerick Park, because the next thing we were going to talk about was the CETA program, the Comprehensive Employment Training Act program, which was a federally funded program signed into law by Nixon in 1973. It ended with Reagan's appointment in 1982. The intent was to impart a marketable skill that would allow participants to move to an unsubsidized job. It was an extension of the WPA program from the 1930s. And this, Gallery 32 was only in existence for 2 years. Brockman Gallery was really growing and evolving, and you were starting to receive funding as a nonprofit for your programs. And at that point, you hired Suzanne as artist coordinator, so you had a working relationship together as well.
We started in 1967. Part of it was in response to the watch riots. And a lot of the artists that came to the gallery, or that we found, were artists who were impacted by the social unrest in Los Angeles. And in a way, that was a core group that came out of that. Noah Purifoy, John Riddle, and a number of others. And so in 66, my brother and I took a ride around the United States because we wanted to identify what we didn't learn in college. What we didn't learn was that artists of color, especially African Americans, were not in history books. And we knew that that wasn't true because we had come from Tuskegee, Alabama, where that was a part of our exposure. So we went from in a Volkswagen sleeping, the back of the boat, and out on the ground, and some unfortunate incidents in Dallas. But, we made Gene Grigsby in Phoenix, Arizona. We went to Jackson, Mississippi, came back through Tuskegee, came up through North Carolina, Durham, Howard University, in Washington, D.C., all up to New York, and back on their beard, and into Canada, and back down through Detroit, Chicago. And we touched a lot of artists and said, we should open a gallery. Well, two young guys driving Volkswagen. Never having been in business, one just out of college and one still in college. without the true intention, truth be told, I'm walking around in Leimert Park, taking a day off work, teaching at LA City Schools. And there's a guy there named David Bradford, who was out of Chicago, a black artist who was teaching at the Watchtowers Art Center. He said, "Yeah, man, there's a space down there to make a great studio. Damn, gallery, you ought to think about it." I'm like, "Why don't you do it?" I went home and told my mom, and she said, "Boy, I don't know what you're doing." I said, "But Mom, we're from Tuskegee." And she said, "Well, go next door. Talk to the gentleman next door. Show him that Reese piece of paper you got." And this is a man named Mr. Parks, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's a legitimate piece of paper. You can sign that paper. You boys go ahead and start that gallery. That's a good idea." And so it had a space underneath. It was lofted. So I said, well, that could be a studio, and then the gallery could be in the loft space. And it rolled. Then Suzanne opened her space, and then we got in trouble. The community didn't support the gallery. And money was, this was business. We were a commercial space. We weren't trying to be a community organization per se. And I went to see a congresswoman who was a state representative at the time, Maxine Waters. And she said, well, there's a National Endowment for the Arts, and there's a guy there named Van Whitfield. I throw these names out because they're really part of history, and at some point you may find them significant in your research and moving around. And so we applied and got and she said, well, you need to form a nonprofit organization to augment or in addition to your for-profit organization. Oh, man. So, followed the lead and took that advice, and we formed Brockman Gallery Productions, which eventually became a nonprofit organization that was funded originally by the NEA for community arts, which led to the CETA Comprehensive Training Act, and some small funds from the City of Los Angeles and California Art Council. And that allowed us to be in a position to say, hey, artists, we would like to employ artists to make art, not to be professionals in what you do, not just to engage in just giving to a community, but to make your work professional. And that's where Suzanne came into the picture. Her enterprise had changed, and we needed some people that had, some hustle. Suzanne could pop a whip. And she had a baby. So she needed funds. I had money.
Well, the interesting thing, in fact, you just reminded me, I had been appointed to the California Arts Commission by the new Governor Jerry Brown. He just called up and said, all right, you're going to be on the Arts Commission. This was with the Reagan Republicans who had been on the old Arts Commission.
And that was the other Jerry Brown. I think there were two of them. Jerry Brown and Jerry Brown Jr. had two personalities.
Yeah.
And became two governors at the anyway, go ahead.
Well, at the time, he appointed three of us to the old commission just to get it going, and Brock Peters was the actor on the old commission. He was the only artist, but there were people like Mrs. Amundsen and the Calls from Save on Grocery. But they were actually very kind people who were funding the symphony and the ballet. But they didn't realize there were other arts, and the arts were different in different parts of the state. So I and Gary Snyder, and allowed Mathieu, who was the director of the Sufi choir, were the three first people appointed. Then when Jerry Brown was officially governor, he expanded the California Arts Council to have people like Peter Coyote, who was a Sawa, and it was an all-artist council, except for Carney Hodge, who was a businessman from, an Armenian businessman from Fresno, and we had a filmmaker. So it was a broad sense of artists on this arts council, which also set kind of a framework, I think, for being able to do a CETA project that was about the arts. And somehow having to read a lot of proposals helped us to have really sharp minds. I think Alonzo and I worked like crazy. I don't think I could do it now, the way that we were working together, writing proposals and organizing programs that actually were artists, all kinds of artists, not just black artists. Everybody in the community was involved. And Alonzo, the reason I really loved working there was Alonzo had the music program. We had an apprentice program. So there were the main artists who were chosen, and I was in that first group. So in that first group, there was Maren Hassinger, Senga Nangudi, there was Roberto Delgado in that one. Who else was
Dan
Conchalar. So Kent Twitchell, who is the major muralist in Los Angeles, when you see really beautifully well-drawn bigger than life-size murals in Los Angeles, those are probably Kent Twitchell of people. So in that first program that Alonzo established, we had artists and apprentices. And even now, in the third group, Harry James Marshall was an apprentice, and now he's one of the well-known artists. So it was an incredible group of artists working together. And that's the reason I really wanted people to know more about Brockman Gallery, because also musicians, the Japanese group Hiroshima was jazz and Japanese scene, and then in the park, in Leimert Park, there was
the interesting thing about just to throw history back in on us, and in a way where we are right now politically, many of the people in the group Hiroshima had come out of Japanese, whose parents had come out of Japanese Germany. So their music and their energy had force. The other thing that kind of overlapped what Suzanne was saying, you learn in school, but real life is trial and error and by the seat of your pants. The California Arts Council really, forced us to be professional in terms of writing.
We did a lot of writing, yeah.
And that's really evidenced in the archive. There's archives on view upstairs, several different topics, but we have one case dedicated to the CETA project. But it's really evidenced in the amount of paperwork and everything that you've saved from that program, the amount of work that went into it. I wanted to add that, against all of this work that you were taking on as an administrator at the time, you were also exhibiting your work very frequently throughout not only LA, but in New York. Showing with Brockman Gallery and having solo shows every 2 years. But I wanted just to briefly mention this mural, Spirit, was one of 2 murals that you painted in Los Angeles as part of the CETA program, and both of them don't exist anymore. Suzanne and I were back in Los Angeles in February, and she said, I want to see if the building is still there. And she realized the building probably was lost during the 1992 riots. But we have some documentation of the work, and would you tell us about it really briefly? This is Spirit, that took about 2 years to complete.
It did, and one of the other things that I was mentioning to Alonzo purchased scaffolding. Did you purchase it, or you purchased it? They had scaffolding. So my assistant and my apprentice and I would move the scaffolding on this mural for each section. Well, I have 2 apprentices. The first one helped me. The way we gridded the mural, he got up on the rooftop, and we did string grid. The chalk line and string grid. And think we just had ladders then. A swing grid and a ladder. And then my next assistant was Alicia Griffin. And she sat with me for the 2 years. She would sit under the tree that was there. Well, actually what happened was this, is the owner of the building was a doctor who was one of my collectors, George Jackson. And of course I could approach him, and this is what was difficult for a lot of us as artists. We received a salary, we were supposed to live on that salary, make art, and go out and find any building or space, and it might be a public space, and then get all of the approval in order to be able to, and the permissions in order to be able to make the work there. I was fortunate because Dr. Jackson was my collector, and he loved it. So eventually, when the mural was done, he actually bought the building next door, made the beautiful parking lot, and put all the landscaping in. But in the 2 years that I was coordinating the other artists and having to do site visits with them and meeting with Alonzo in Alonzo's truck, we'd be going out eating lunch in the truck and having conversations about what we should do. I was working, and finally toward the end, I think working almost every day on this mural, which was 2 stories high and about 58.5 feet long. But what was such a pleasure was the people in the community would come by, and this was the only mural on Western and in this neighborhood, and the buses would go north and south on the street. So I made a number of friends in the community, and they watched the mural. It was up for 4 years. There was never a mark on it. And then the new owner of the building decided that he would improve it by painting over it. It took 2 hours. It took 2 hours to paint over it, so it took 2 years to finish. And I was really proud of it. The wonderful thing about this, Agnes Varda, who just passed away this year, was a filmmaker coming to Los Angeles to make a film about something else. And she saw the murals that were being done, and she stopped to film this one. So her film, Mirrors, actually documented many of the murals that are not there anymore, and mine was included. And my son is actually bouncing the ball in front of the mural, using that as scale. So I was glad that it was documented. It's part of the Mural Conservancy, Los Angeles Mural Conservancy now. That saved a lot of murals, even the ones from the CETA project, actually. So it was piece by piece, and I think in some note I may have said that this was the culmination of all the little paintings that I had done, where the notes were put into this big one. The first mural was smaller. It was only 11 feet high by 58 feet long on Crenshaw Wall. The
Titled
Wind, yeah. The Crenshaw Wall is now becoming a sculpture park.
Well, it's a changing wall.
Yeah, it's still changing, or is it going to become an all-sculpture, dedicated sculpture wall park?
Right now, it's in transition.
Oh, it's okay. Everything's always in transition.
Well, Suzanne, I want to talk about your painting for a moment. A big story of this retrospective, a lot of conversations that we had over the past 2 years was the insistence of Suzanne as a painter. She primarily identifies as a painter, I think you both do, but you're also a poet and a writer and a dancer and a set designer, really a Renaissance artist in the whole sense of the term. But what we're looking at here too, I thought this was a really interesting pairing. It's a painting that's in the exhibition, both of them are. On the left is Animal from 1974, and on the right is one of the newest works in the exhibition, Then to Be Alone from 2018. I wanted to ask if you could sort of talk about the evolution. Looking at them together on the screen, it looks like 2 different artists could have made them, and we've sort of bridged that gap. And you'll see, if you haven't been upstairs, there's one gallery dedicated to her new work, which she calls living artworks or structured works. So yeah, maybe speak a little bit about the evolution of your work from 45 years in between these two.
It's fascinating seeing these 2 paintings together that she put together, because it's almost, for me, although they're supposedly different, I see such a strong relationship, and I would not have even thought of it if they had been put together in this way. The first one, of course, is on stretched canvas, and at this point, many of the mediums and gels, acrylic gels, had not been invented yet, And the company that we use in California, Los Angeles, is Nova Color Paint, Artex. It is actually 20 or 30 years older than Golden paints. And when I moved to the East Coast, there was only Golden paint. And
it was actually a family out of Mexico that did handmade painting. Handmade paint that migrated to Culver City, right on the edge.
And they still have the same building on Black Welder Street. And from my story, I also understood was that Mr. Gutierrez was made paint for cars, and because cars used to fade the paint, and they developed a way of them. And they also were making ceramic color, from what I was told.
Right.
And now I think it's gone down generations. But I live by this paint, and my students who studied with me used to be a joke that I actually used Nova Super Gel to hold my house together. So they were always teasing me because I was saying, you've got to use really good mediums. But progressively, what's happened between these two pieces is that the first one was a great deal of gesso, and I was experimenting with whites. My very first solo show was at University of Pacific in Stockton, California. The artist Larry Walker, who lives in Atlanta now, whom I feel still hasn't received all the credit he should, even though he's had retrospective. His daughter, Cara, received the MacArthur. And Larry Walker actually curated my first solo show. I would drive across from San Francisco to Stockton. There was rolling hills, and so the first of the new styles of windmills would be along the mountains with cows and things. And so this was part of those strange tree shapes were from those California rolling hills, but also basically these, what I call acrylic washes. They're almost put down like watercolor, but in the layering effect of the old master's way of painting layers and layers in oil paint. How this has evolved now into the new work is that I have worked with the glazes and with acrylic from the early 1960s to now, to the point where no one told me I couldn't do it, but I wanted to float just the paint. And so I used the paint as its own surface. And so the newest work are acrylic on acrylic. And there are some places where just experimenting with structure, because it was 100 degrees, more than 100 degrees this summer, and I've had to really work out how do I structure these paints so they're strong enough, they're holding themselves, and what kind of structures do I use with them. This one has a little bit of structure on the sides at the top that is actually beer netting, and then those pieces of color are leftover scraps from my mother's quilts, and the rest is all paint. So I'm really experimenting with and I'm working on some pieces in the studio right now that I started a couple of weeks ago. That will be a double-sided paint, really big one, double-sided. But the paint and the weight of the paint and how the structure and how much, and I let them hang so they stretch in this heat, and then find out where the weaknesses will be, and then go back into it with more paint. So I'm really interested in the strength of the paint and what it can do in this environment. So even environmentally working in the in-between stages here in Savannah with humidity was a recognition of what humidity can do to your papers and paint. And it's been a learning experience. So
I want to say that when you view, or if you have seen the work and see it again, the overriding quality for me are the transparencies.
Yeah.
And you can see that from 50 years of continuous work with kind of a transparent quality of overlaying colors and light.
Yeah. One of the things also which surprised me, I was going through, my mother she had a whole chest for me, but it was really for her. And I opened it up last year and discovered these drawings that I had done when we still lived in San Francisco when I was a baby. My dad would take me everywhere. And I would come back and make drawings from memory and observation. And the one that we don't have in the show that really influenced me was the Bay Bridge has Treasure Island right in the middle. When we moved to San Francisco, it was because my uncles were stationed at Treasure Island, both of them, which was not supposed to happen. But in this little drawing, there's a Quonset hut. And the only place I'd ever seen a Quonset hut was in Alaska that I remembered. And I was really surprised to see that I had drawn this Quonset hut and the 1 or 2 little buildings on Treasure Island. I couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 drawing this. So there's a drawing, one drawing from a fashion show that I was in that's upstairs. So for observation, and then also in Alaska, the first paintings that we did, they have us. We didn't really have an art teacher in elementary school, so the woman said copy from National Geographic. And we were using watercolor. So I think that I've probably, over the years, the techniques of watercolor, laying it down in the glazes, and I just continued that. My final paintings in my senior year were kind of watercolor on canvas, gesso canvas. Oh, now actually it wasn't gesso. In those days we had to actually use rabbit skin glue and white lead and wait 14 days between each layer and prime the canvas. I tried to teach that at Cameron as we started. It was like painting 101 and make a miter in a box and learn how to cut your wood and all that with a saw. That's the way we learned to paint. You learn to paint that way, Kim? Yeah.
I refuse.
But, you know, that's the way I learned to paint. When I finally got to college, I had art classes. Those are the things we learned. But I think that what I see that sort of comes through is the whole watercolor technique that I started, you know, in elementary school learning to use. And I just continue because I love working with those glazes. And then even in the oil paint, learning to glaze with oil paint and the translucency that's in the work. Mm-hmm.
I want to talk just for a moment about archives. You know, a big part of this exhibition and retrospective is showing archival materials. And that was both to sort of supplement the work on the wall and help fill in some stories, as well as represent, you know, Suzanne's artistic practice in its fullest form. You know, thinking about her theater career and her scenic design career, poetry she has published over the years. The show would not have been complete if we only showed her visual work, her paintings. So it was a big part of the show, but I wanted to ask you both sort of your relationship to archives, both with historic material. You know, this is sort of some archival ephemera from Brockman Gallery. And there's Alonzo in the middle there on the left. And some material from Gallery 32 is on view in the exhibition. So how do you value the importance of archives, both these historic archives, but also how are you thinking about playing your own legacies?
Very important.
Yeah.
Very important.
He told me he was going to burn his house down. Please don't do that, you'll make us embarrassed.
The tax structure in the United States is very difficult when you leave behind works of art to your estate or relatives. And people can be charged a lot of money for something that has no value until it has value. And you never know if it ever will have value. So some of my friends from Temple, the good Jewish community brothers who I used to commune with, would say, just burn it up. It's over, you're dead. And I kind of bought into that. Unfortunately, I have a brother who feels a little similar. So he got a grant a few years ago to archive and digitize all of the material. And he brought me out, and we went through all of those files, and musty closets, and file cabinets, and storage lockers that we were paying too much money on for years. It's all digitized, and as of this year, it's a part of the Los Angeles Public Library's archives. And I can say, go there. Now, what I do with my homework, I'm going to live long enough to be a rich man.
I loved it when Alonzo said that. You know, I want to be able to sell my work on while I'm still alive. You know, it's not afterwards.
Artists eat too.
Yeah. 1970s, we were approached by the Smithsonian, but we were all kind of rebellious and said, we want to have our own archive, we're going to have our own museum. And that's when Sonoma Lewis also started her museum. She started in the storefront, and then it became the Museum of African American Art. When we were on the California Arts Council, we also were the ones, up here for Peter Coyote and me, who said, we'd better sign this Museum of the California African American Museum of Art. We better make sure this piece of legislation can go through the Arts Council. It may not go through at all. It's a little bit ragged, but we've got to get this through. So we had those two museums. But of course, the times change, and we realize now that maybe it was what I did not know, and I've just learned this since I've been in the South, in Savannah, but also the National Museum, the National Museum of African American Art and History, that opened in Washington, D.C. officially, how many years ago was it now? 2 or 3 years ago? I did not know that that was being planned since the 1920s or 30s. Many of us didn't know that. And so I was there for the inauguration of that museum, and it was interesting because that was sort of Junior Bush, what's his name? George Bush, their son, whose wife is a Loris. Anyway, they were it was his grand. I'm sorry, I apologize. W was there with his wife, and it was to me his grandest moment because basically they were really proud. They were with the Obamas in order to initiate that museum. I stood outside, and it was the most beautiful thing to stand on a hill, and there was hundreds of thousands of people. And the only person I knew was Carrie Mae Weeks, who just happened to come through taking photos. But I decided at that point, that's where things from my family should go. I'd forgotten that I had already done an oral history with the Getty. But I'd also felt like because I'm from the West Coast, I wanted many of my things that were history from the West Coast to go to the Getty. And they've now started an archival program of American art, but especially making sure that a number of the African American artists who have been neglected will be able to have their works archived at the Getty. So parts of my work will probably go to the Getty, and the other part to the Smithsonian, the family records to the Smithsonian.
I'd like to give a shout out to Lonnie Bunch.
Yes. Oh, and he's now having all. This is what's so fascinating about living a little bit longer is that you know people when they're just somebody, their neighbor or the person who's interested in something. You never know who you're sitting next to. A person who just gets some energy and decides to do something, do the next thing. And, that's the way our lives are actually. So you can't take people for granted. Their energy and interest is what really makes a difference in the world, I think.
Well, I want to end with this idea of, you both identifying as painters, and you're now sort of in the point of your career where you're able to dedicate full time to your painting practice in your studios. And Alonzo asked me last night, he said, well, what do you want to know, Rachel? When I said, let's talk about our topics. And something that I've been thinking about, and we've discussed in the organization of this show, is how to navigate being historicized and being a contemporary artist simultaneously. And I want to sort of open that up for you to respond to is, where are you now with your studio practice? Talk about the importance of friendship over a long period of time, and how you are negotiating, the line between your history and your present day.
I don't consider myself a painter. I consider myself a person who learned to paint, who is an artist. As an artist, I'm a black man who comes from a very diverse background, which includes slavery and the Native American community. And when I did my DNA, I realized that my parents were telling me that I came from the Gold Coast and Ghana, but the DNA said tar, which means that I'm really out of the desert, Mali, that whole tribal group that many of whom were captured and sold through the slave trade. And Brockman is the name of the family that owned the slave, and we carry that. That's our family name. And so that's the name of Brockman. But interns, mentorship, carrying it forward. And these ladies are working with Suzanne. A young lady working with me is out of Corcoran, on her way to Japan for 2 years. Another young lady, and they show up. I don't even ask them to come. They show up. And one guy, Bob, is now doing curatorial and restoration work for the Smithsonian, restoring sculptures in the Capitol. So you don't know who the people you will touch, and you don't know how much your life influence and what you have to share will carry forward with them, irregardless of their culture. And I'm really proud of that as much as what we end up accomplishing in the studio.
Well, last summer was the first time I actually started attempting to, well, I don't think, Rachel was looking at my 4-H notebooks from Alaska, where we had to record everything we did. She couldn't believe all the writing in them. And 4-H, made you do that. And also the school I attended, we always had to record everything. We had to keep records. And I'm always keeping records, and I have a hard time throwing anything out. I was about to throw away newspapers recently when I found out that even here in Savannah, they did not have a photo and an article that's very important about the Starland District. I'm putting this up. So I decided I was happy that I'd saved my copy. So now I'm saying I won't throw away some newspapers that I thought I was going to get rid of. Yeah. Well, I think the young women that were, we had Gad, Parsons, and Spellman, you three, incredible. And it's like Rachel put together some incredible interns, and they want to know everything because they're really young. And it's, at a point at our age, we're thinking, who wants to know that? They've seen these paintings, people have seen them for 40 years. But then we realize now, even with someone like Rachel, there's a calendar for a year of image that was published. I think my son was sick, and Rachel said, that's the day I was born. So I realized that, oh my, we have a whole new generation of young people who really, and the sensitivity I think that we've had working on this is about the nuances of the new generation and how they understand the history from which we come, but then that experience they have not had. So it's really trying to put things in line and in order of how these things happen was very important. I think, did you all put everything that you found on me? You digitalized everything, I think? Yeah, I think my whole life now is all I don't know where anything is anymore because they've taken it all out and they've got scanned everything. And so I think I'm digitalized. There's still a lot of stuff in the studio that hasn't been, but I think that for that, because it really has been a privilege to work. And I would like to say that this has been a beautiful experience because having Keith and Luton and the registrar working in the galleries to put the installation together, incredible team. Having an incredible team of catalog writers, you'll see that when the catalog is done, having beautiful people working for me, as interns, and Rachel hanging in there with me disputing history and the relationship. Mexico is on the other side of the country. You go there first in California, and you don't go to South America first. Little things like that are picky. But what we try to do is to correct great deal of misinformation. Alonzo and I both know when something is published, then somebody else copies that, and then it perpetuates. And I was not on tour as a modern dancer in South America. I was with a musical theater company as a ballet dancer. Well, that one thing has been repeated. Someone, Anna straightened out Wikipedia, had everything correct. Somebody went into Wikipedia and changed it and said, I worked at Yale, and I worked here, and I worked there, and then another person, museum actually copied that and used it as an introduction. And this is what I think is really important. Not just looking on the phone and catching the first headline, but really researching, and that's important, for us in archiving in that sense, that researching and referencing and checking the references. And this team has been really good about that. So I think people should really congratulate the Telfair as well for this first experience for everyone.
Thank you for your generosity as always, Suzanne. It's been a pleasure working on this show, and we are very excited to share it with you and continue the conversation upstairs and in the atrium. As you enjoy the reception this evening, please grab them and talk with them. They have many stories to tell and share, and thank you for coming.